U.S. Marines laughed at the veteran's old scope until his shot shattered a 35-year record. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. It was a brisk morning at the military base, and the sound of rifle shots echoed through the air. The training session for the U.S. Marines was in full swing, and the young soldiers were testing their sniper rifles. Laughter broke out among them as they observed an elderly man standing outside the firing range, quietly preparing his old, worn sniper rifle. The Marines couldn't hold back their mocking chuckles as they watched the man. "Is that thing even still working?" one of them sneered, pointing at the rifle. "Looks like it's seen better days." The man, who appeared to be in his late 60s, was dressed in simple clothes. Not the typical uniform of a soldier, but just a worn jacket and jeans. His silver hair, slightly disheveled from age, was the only indication of his years. Despite the jokes, he didn't flinch or show any signs of discomfort. He simply adjusted his old rifle scope, calmly surveying the target downrange. The Marines continued to make fun of him. "That thing is older than you, Grandpa," one of them said, laughing. "You gonna show us how to shoot, or what?" The man, without saying a word, simply glanced in their direction and gave a faint nod. His silence only fueled their amusement. As the Marine who had spoken stepped up to the firing line, he turned to the old man and asked, "You know how to use that old scope? Or is it just for decoration?" The man, still silent, only adjusted the scope slightly, as if preparing for something that none of them expected. It was obvious the Marines didn't take him seriously. To them, he was just an old man with an outdated piece of equipment. They couldn't understand why he was even here. As they continued to make fun of him, one Marine boldly walked up and tapped the old scope, shaking his head. "I can't believe you're still holding on to this relic," he muttered. "This thing couldn't hit a target if it tried." Without a word, the old man raised the rifle, peering down the scope. The Marines didn't stop, still laughing among themselves as they set up their own shots. Then, without warning, the man fired a single shot. The sound of the bullet hitting the target was deafening in the otherwise silent air. The group fell silent as they watched, their amusement slowly turning into confusion. The old man had just shattered a record that had stood for 35 years, a record none of them had thought could ever be broken. They looked at each other, not sure how to react. The shot was so precise, so powerful, that it left the entire group speechless. The man lowered his rifle and turned to face them, his expression calm, but there was an undeniable air of authority about him. The Marines who had mocked him moments ago stood frozen in place, staring in disbelief at what had just happened. They had underestimated the man, assuming his age and his old rifle made him irrelevant. But now, they had been proven wrong. The sound of their mocking laughter seemed to echo in their ears as the old man simply nodded and began to walk away, leaving the stunned Marines to absorb the weight of what had just occurred. The Marines stood there, frozen in disbelief, staring at the target where the bullet had struck dead center. The sound of the shot still echoed in the air, but it was quickly replaced by the silence that settled over the group. The old man, the one they had ridiculed just moments before, now stood there, his rifle resting casually in his hands. His eyes, calm and unflinching, surveyed the scene before him as if he had expected this moment all along. He didn't say a word, just lowered the rifle and began to pack his things, as though this was nothing out of the ordinary. The Marines stood motionless, unsure of what to do next. It was one thing to make fun of someone. It was another to be utterly humbled by them. One of the younger Marines, his confidence shattered, slowly stepped forward, glancing at his comrades for reassurance before speaking. Who are you?" he asked, his voice uncertain. The old man didn't answer right away. He just looked at the young Marine for a moment, as if weighing how much he wanted to reveal. The silence was thick, but then, the man spoke in a voice that was quiet but held a weight that carried far beyond his years. "Names don't mean anything anymore," he said simply. "Not after everything I've seen." His words hung in the air, leaving a sense of awe in their wake. The Marines exchanged confused looks, trying to process what had just happened. They had underestimated him, the old man with the weathered rifle. But they had no idea just how deep his experience went. As the old man started to walk away, his footsteps slow but steady, one of the Marines snapped out of his stupor and called after him. "Wait! What was that shot? How did you do it?" The old man paused, but didn't turn around. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before continuing his walk, his back straight, his demeanor unshaken. The Marines, still in shock, watched him disappear into the distance, their admiration for him growing by the second. But their questions remained unanswered. What kind of man could do what he just did? What was his story? They all knew that what had just happened was no coincidence, and the story of the shot, the record he had shattered, was one that they needed to understand. As they slowly returned to their training, the weight of the old man's presence lingered in the air. Meanwhile, the young Marine who had first mocked him stood there, the guilt weighing heavily on his conscience. He had been the loudest in his ridicule, the first to laugh at the old man's worn-out scope. But now, as he thought about the flawless shot, his confidence seemed foolish, his arrogance hollow. Later that day, the Marine couldn't shake the image of the old man from his mind. He found himself wandering the base, unsure of what he was looking for, but knowing he had to find out more. He passed by the mess hall, the barracks, and finally, after what felt like hours, he found himself at the base's old armory. The door was slightly ajar, and he hesitated for a moment before walking in. Inside, the air was thick, with the smell of metal and oil. Rows of old weapons and gear lined the walls, relics from wars long past. And there, standing by one of the old lockers, was the old man. He was fiddling with something in his hands, the same rifle he had used earlier, though now it looked even more weathered, its stock worn smooth from years of use. The Marine stood frozen in the doorway, watching as the old man worked. He was struck by how effortless it seemed, how natural. The man wasn't just repairing a rifle, he was giving it life again, breathing new purpose into an old tool. "You should have been a sniper," the Marine said, his voice almost a whisper. The old man looked up, his eyes meeting the young Marine's. "I was," he replied, his voice steady. "Once." The words sent a chill down the Marine's spine. "Once," he echoed. The old man nodded, his expression unreadable. "But that was a long time ago." The Marine hesitated, then stepped closer. "Why are you here?" he asked. "You could have retired. Gone home." The old man's eyes softened, but only slightly. "Home is where the mission is," he said. "And as long as I can still do something, I'll do it." The Marine felt a lump form in his throat, the realization hitting him that he had no idea what the old man had been through, what he had seen. "I didn't know," the Marine muttered. "I didn't know who you were." The old man gave a small smile, but it was tinged with sadness. "It's not about who I am now. It's about who you are when you face what's ahead." The Marine stood in silence, the weight of the old man's words settling on him. He had been wrong about the old man, wrong about so many things. And as he turned to leave the armory, he knew that he had a lot to learn, a lot to prove. The next day, the Marine who had mocked the old man found himself standing in front of the armory once again, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the image of the old man, calm and collected, as if he had all the time in the world. He had shattered a 35-year record with a single shot, and yet, he had remained humble, even after the Marines had laughed at him. The young Marine had to know more. What had he missed? What kind of man was he really? He had already made a decision. Today he was going to find out. He passed through the armory doors, determined, and there, to his surprise, was the old man, standing by a table, polishing the old rifle. The man didn't look up at first, but the young Marine felt an overwhelming urge to speak. "Sir," he began, his voice hesitant, "I need to ask you something. You're not just some old guy with a broken-down rifle, are you?" The old man stopped polishing for a moment, his eyes glancing up at the Marine, and then he smiled, not with arrogance, but with something like understanding. "That's what most people think," the old man replied, his voice steady. "But the rifle, it's not the important part. The important part is how you use it, how you see through it, what you can do with it." The Marine felt a strange pang in his chest. He had heard about legendary snipers before, but to stand in front of one, it was surreal. "You've been a sniper?" the Marine asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The old man nodded, his gaze never leaving the rifle. "I was. A long time ago. In places you've never seen. But it's not about the rank. It's not about the medals. The Marine leaned in, his curiosity piqued. Then what is it about? The old man looked up at him, meeting his eyes for the first time. It's about saving lives, he said quietly. That's what it's always been about. The words hit the Marine harder than he expected. He had never thought about it like that before. To him, the military was always about honor, duty, and pride. But the old man, this veteran, had a different view. It was about saving others. The Marine sat down across from him, still processing what he had just heard. What do you mean? He asked, almost as if he needed to hear more, to understand it better. The old man put down the rifle and folded his hands, his eyes distant as if he was seeing something far beyond the armory walls. There was one mission. A long time ago, in the mountains of Afghanistan. We were pinned down, surrounded. The enemy was closing in, and we were outnumbered. The team was stuck, but I had a shot. A long one. A shot that would either make it or break it. I knew if I missed, they would all be dead. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I didn't miss. And it wasn't just one shot. It was every shot after that. It was every decision I made. It was saving my brothers, my team. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what had to be done. The Marine sat in stunned silence. The weight of the old man's words felt like a heavy burden on his chest. You did all that, with that rifle? The Marine asked, gesturing toward the old weapon on the table. The old man nodded. With this rifle, and with a clear mind. It's not the gun that makes the sniper. It's the person behind the trigger. The Marine looked down at the rifle, his mind whirling with the realization that he had been wrong about so much. I never knew, he murmured. The old man gave a soft chuckle. No one ever does. That's the thing about being a sniper. You're meant to be invisible. No one should ever know you were there until the job is done. The Marine was silent for a long time, reflecting on everything he had just heard. He had thought he understood what it meant to serve, to protect. But the old man's words had opened his eyes to a new way of thinking. As he stood up to leave, he looked at the old man one last time. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. The old man smiled, a small, knowing smile. Don't thank me, he said. Just remember what you learned today. Keep your head straight, and you'll be fine. The Marine walked out of the armory, his mind buzzing with new thoughts, new perspectives. He had come in expecting to learn something about a rifle, but what he had learned was something much deeper. It wasn't about the equipment. It was about the person who used it. And as he walked through the base, he realized that, in a way, he had just started his own journey, one that would change the way he saw the world forever. The next morning, the Marine walked through the base with a newfound sense of purpose. His thoughts were still on the old man and the lessons he had learned. The words of the veteran echoed in his mind as he passed by the training grounds where the Marines were preparing for their next exercise. It was strange, but the old man had somehow made him rethink everything he thought he knew about being a soldier. It wasn't about the weapons, the gear, or even the mission itself. It was about something deeper, about the men and women behind the uniforms, the bonds they shared, and the sacrifices they made. As the Marine made his way toward the mess hall, he noticed a group of soldiers gathered around a table, laughing and joking. Their easy camaraderie seemed like a world apart from the weight of what he had just learned. The sound of their voices felt almost foreign to him now, as if he had crossed over into a different reality. But as he walked past them, one of the soldiers waved him over. Hey man, you're the one who saw that old guy shoot, right? The Marine paused, a little taken aback by the sudden attention. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, especially not after what had happened. Yeah, he said quietly. I saw it. The soldier grinned. That was one hell of a shot, wasn't it? I mean, who knew that old man could do something like that? The Marine didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure how to explain what had happened. It wasn't just the shot. It was everything that had led up to it. The way the old man had handled the ridicule, the way he remained calm and composed, and most of all, the wisdom he had shared. It was hard to put into words, but the Marine knew something had shifted in him that day. He wasn't the same person he had been before. He took a deep breath, then turned to the soldier. That shot, it wasn't just luck, he said slowly. That man, he's been through things we can't even imagine. He's a legend, not just because of the shot, but because of everything he's done, everything he's seen. The soldier raised an eyebrow. You serious? He's just some old guy. The Marine's eyes narrowed. You don't get it. That guy was a sniper. He saved lives. He did things that none of us will ever have to do, and he did it with nothing but his skills, his mind, and a rifle that's probably seen more action than any of us. The soldier seemed taken aback by the Marine's tone. I didn't mean any disrespect, he muttered. I just thought it was funny. The Marine shook his head. I know you didn't. But sometimes, the things we find funny are the things we don't understand. And that's something we need to fix. With that, the Marine turned and walked away, leaving the group of soldiers in silence. His thoughts were heavy, but he knew he was on the right path. He didn't need to explain everything to them. Not yet. He had his own journey to complete. The rest would follow. Later that afternoon, the Marine found himself back at the armory, standing in front of the old man once again. He had come to realize that he needed to ask one more question, to understand fully what had been left unsaid. The old man looked up from the rifle he was cleaning and gave a slight nod. Back again, he asked with a wry smile. The Marine hesitated for a moment, then sat down across from him. I need to know something, he said. What made you choose to stay in the fight all these years? I mean, you've seen it all, done it all. What keeps you going? The old man paused, his expression unreadable. He didn't immediately answer, instead taking a moment to put down the rifle and look out the window. The silence stretched between them, but the Marine didn't mind. He knew the old man had something important to say. Finally, the old man turned back to him. It's simple, he said. It's not about the glory or the recognition. It's about the people you save, the people you protect, the ones who count on you when everything falls apart. You don't stop because you're tired. You don't stop because it's hard. You keep going because that's what you do. That's what makes you a soldier. The Marine listened closely, absorbing every word. It was the answer he had been looking for, the one thing that had eluded him all this time. Being a soldier wasn't about fighting wars or winning medals. It was about doing what had to be done, no matter the cost, for the people who needed it most. As the Marine stood up to leave, he realized that he would never be the same again. The old man had changed something inside him, something fundamental. He wasn't just a Marine anymore. He was someone who understood what it truly meant to serve, and that knowledge would carry him through whatever came next. The Marine walked through the base the next day, his mind still reeling from the conversations he'd had with the old man. What he had learned over the past few days had changed him in ways he couldn't fully explain yet. The old man had made him rethink everything about his purpose, about his role as a soldier, and what it really meant to serve. As he made his way through the training grounds, the familiar sounds of rifle shots and drills filled the air, but they felt distant now. The Marine couldn't focus on them the way he used to. Instead, his thoughts drifted back to the old man's words. It's not about the glory or the recognition. It's about the people you save. The simple truth of it weighed heavily on him. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing the work, even when no one was looking. He found himself thinking about the long hours, the countless sacrifices, and the lives that had been shaped by every choice made on the battlefield. But the more he thought, the more he realized that he had only scratched the surface of what it truly meant to be a soldier. Later that afternoon, he returned to the armory, driven by an urge he couldn't quite place. The old man was there, cleaning his rifle as always, his focus unwavering. This time, the Marine didn't hesitate. He walked up to the old man, stood silently for a moment, and then asked, "How did you know when to stop?" The old man didn't look up right away. He just kept working, as though the question wasn't a surprise, as though he had been expecting it. After a long pause, he slowly set the rifle down and turned to face the Marine. "You never really stop," the old man said quietly. "You just keep going. You don't stop because you think it's over. You stop when the mission is done. And even then, you're always ready to pick up again." The Marine nodded, trying to grasp the weight of what the old man was saying. He thought about all the times he had pushed himself, thinking it was too much, thinking that he couldn't take any more. But maybe that wasn't the right way to look at it. Maybe it wasn't about pushing to the breaking point. Maybe it was about knowing when to keep going, when to fight for something bigger than yourself. "How did you deal with it?" the Marine asked, his voice low. "With the things you saw, the things you did." The old man's face softened, a faraway look in his eyes as he glanced at the rifle in front of him. "You don't forget. You can't, but you learn to live with it. You carry it, but you don't let it carry you." The words struck the Marine deeply. He had never thought about it like that before. He had been so focused on the physical side of being a soldier, on the training, the weapons, the strategy, that he hadn't realized the emotional toll it took. The things you saw, the choices you made, They stayed with you, shaped you. But they didn't define you, not unless you let them. The Marine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He had a lot of questions, but somehow, he felt like he was starting to find the answers. The old man had given him more than just advice. He had given him a new perspective. I think I get it, the Marine said quietly. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up. Every day, doing the work. And when the time comes, you do what needs to be done. The old man nodded slowly. That's right. It's not about the medals or the accolades. It's about doing what you're called to do. And when you're done, when it's time to walk away, you know you've done your part. The Marine felt a shift inside him. The pressure he had been feeling, the pressure to prove something, to be something, began to melt away. He didn't have to be a hero. He didn't have to be the best at everything. He just had to do his job and do it with honor. That was enough. As the sun began to set over the base, the Marine stood there, watching the sky turn a deep shade of orange. He had spent so many years trying to be someone else, trying to live up to an ideal that was bigger than him. But now, he realized that he didn't need to be anyone but himself. The journey ahead would be hard. He knew that, but he was ready for it. He was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that being a soldier wasn't about glory. It was about doing the work, day in and day out, and knowing that when the time came, he would be ready to make the shot that mattered. The Marine had never felt more alive than in that moment. It was as if the weight of the world had shifted off his shoulders. He had spent years chasing a sense of purpose, but it was only now, after everything, that he understood what it truly meant to serve. The truth the old man had shared with him was more than just lessons in combat or strategy. It was about the spirit behind every soldier, the heart that kept beating even when everything around them seemed impossible. As he walked across the base the next morning, he felt different, changed. He wasn't just walking toward his duties. He was walking with a new understanding. The world didn't seem as overwhelming anymore. The pressure, the expectations, they didn't matter as much. What mattered was the simple fact that he had a job to do. The Marine had spent most of his life measuring success in medals and records, but he knew now that those things didn't define a soldier. It was the moments in between, the quiet ones, the decisions made in the dark when no one was looking. That was what truly mattered. As he approached the firing range for morning practice, he noticed a few of the younger Marines gathered in a circle, talking amongst themselves. He didn't want to interrupt, but one of them waved him over, clearly excited. Hey, you got a minute? The young Marine asked, a grin on his face. We've been talking, and well, we all kind of owe you an apology. The Marine stood for a moment, surprised. An apology? He repeated, unsure of what to make of it. The younger Marine nodded. Yeah, about the old guy yesterday. We didn't get it at first. We just thought he was some relic, but after what you said, his voice trailed off as the others around him nodded in agreement. You were right. He's a damn legend. And we were wrong to laugh. The Marine couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride, not for himself, but for the realization the others had come to. They were starting to understand something he had only just begun to grasp. It's not about being perfect, he said, speaking softly but with conviction. It's about showing up. Every day, doing the work, even when it feels impossible. There was a pause as the words settled in. Then the young Marine stepped forward and extended his hand. We get it now? Thanks, man, he said, his tone sincere. The Marine shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. This was what it was all about. Not the glory, not the recognition, but the respect earned through action, through doing the right thing when it mattered most. As the morning practice began, the Marine found himself falling into a rhythm. His actions were more deliberate now, more focused. He wasn't thinking about what others expected of him or what he could prove. He was thinking about the job, the mission, and the people who depended on him to get it done. It was a different kind of clarity, one he hadn't experienced before. The targets on the range seemed almost irrelevant now. His mind was no longer clouded by self-doubt or a need to impress anyone. He was simply there, doing his best, as he always should have. During a break, the Marine sat down by the fence, letting the breeze cool his face. He glanced at the other Marines, who were busy working on their shots, but this time, he didn't feel the competitive tension he once had. Instead, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long time, he was at peace with himself. And it wasn't because of the record he had shattered or the respect he had earned. It was because he understood what he was fighting for. It wasn't about being the best. It was about doing the job, regardless of the odds. The old man had taught him that, in ways that words alone never could. As the day wore on and the sun began to set, the Marine felt a familiar sense of calm wash over him. It wasn't the calm of a battle won or a mission completed. It was the calm of knowing that he had found his purpose, that he was finally in the right place. As he packed his gear and prepared to head back to his barracks, the Marine looked up at the sky, watching the last light of the day fade into twilight. The old man had been right. This was what it was all about. Not the medals, not the recognition, but the work, the mission, and the quiet moments of understanding. And in that quiet, he found peace. The days that followed felt different for the Marine. The routine of daily drills and training no longer seemed like a chore. Every shot, every movement was deliberate, purposeful. The weight of the old man's words still echoed in his mind. It wasn't about the accolades or the glory. It was about the work. He had realized that the true value of a soldier wasn't measured by their rank or the medals they wore. It was measured by their integrity, their dedication, and their willingness to do whatever it took to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As he sat on the edge of the firing range, the Marine reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. He no longer felt the same hunger for recognition that once drove him. Instead, he felt a sense of peace. The old man's lessons had sunk deep into his heart. He no longer sought approval from his peers or superiors. The approval he needed now came from within. The Marine had started to see the bigger picture, to understand that being a soldier wasn't about being the best at everything. It was about being part of something larger than oneself. It was about serving with honor and humility, even when no one was watching. One afternoon, the Marine was called to a meeting with his commanding officer. When he walked into the office, he was greeted with a stern expression, but there was something else there too, a hint of respect. "Marine," the officer said, "you've been doing well lately. Your performance on the range has improved, and your attitude has changed. There's something different about you. I can see it." The Marine nodded, unsure of how to respond. He didn't need praise. He didn't need recognition, but it was still nice to hear. The officer continued, "We've been watching your progress. It's clear you've learned something important, something that goes beyond just firing a rifle. And for that, I think you're ready for a new challenge." The Marine's heart rate quickened. A new challenge? What did that mean? "What do you mean, sir?" The officer stood up and walked over to the map on the wall, pointing to a location on the far side of the base. "We've got an exercise coming up. It's not going to be like the usual drills. It's a real-world simulation. We need soldiers who can think on their feet, who understand strategy, who can handle pressure. We need people who can be leaders, even in the toughest situations." The Marine felt a surge of nervous energy, but also a sense of readiness. This was it, the test that would prove he had learned everything the old man had taught him. "I'm ready, sir," he said. The officer smiled. "I knew you would be. This is your chance to show what you're made of." The exercise was scheduled for the following week, and the Marine spent every waking moment preparing. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about making sure every move was flawless. It was about using his training, using everything he had learned, and applying it in the most challenging of circumstances. When the day of the exercise arrived, the Marine stood with his team, surrounded by the familiar sights of the base. But today was different. Today, the stakes were higher. This wasn't just another drill. This was the real deal. The exercise was intense. It tested every aspect of their training, from tactical decision-making to physical endurance. The Marine found himself in situations that forced him to think quickly, to adapt to the unexpected. There were moments of fear, moments when it seemed like everything could fall apart. But each time, the Marine remembered the lessons he had learned. He stayed calm, focused on the mission, and kept moving forward. As the exercise came to a close, the team gathered in the debriefing room. The officer walked in, his face serious but with a hint of pride. "Well done, everyone," he said. "You all performed exceptionally well. But there's one Marine I want to highlight today." The Marine's stomach twisted. Who would it be? He had done his best, but he didn't expect anything special. "Marine," the officer continued, "you showed exceptional leadership today. Your decisions were solid, and you kept your team together even in the toughest situations. I've seen growth in you, growth that goes beyond what we expected." The Marine felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't about being recognized. It wasn't about being the best. But hearing those words, coming from the officer, meant something to him. It meant that the work he had put in, the lessons he had learned, had paid off. It meant that he had become the kind of soldier he wanted to be. The officer turned to the rest of the team. You've all got a lot to learn from this Marine. He's proven what it means to be a soldier. Not just in skill, but in heart. The Marine stood there, feeling the weight of the moment. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't the best. But he had earned something far more valuable than any medal or recognition. He had earned respect. And that, he realized, was what really mattered. The days after the exercise felt surreal to the Marine. He had proven to himself and to others what he was capable of, but something lingered. A part of him still sought something more, some deeper understanding of his purpose. The lesson he had learned, that it wasn't about glory or recognition, had stuck with him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to discover. He had come a long way since the first time he had met the old man. The arrogance, the need to prove himself, it all seemed so distant now. But every time he looked at his rifle, every time he looked at the other Marines around him, the question remained, what was it all for? He hadn't come to an answer yet. One morning, as he walked to the mess hall, lost in thought, he bumped into the old man again. The veteran was sitting outside, as usual, his old rifle leaning against the chair next to him. He was looking out across the base, as though lost in thought. You seem deep in thought, Marine, the old man said, his voice steady but curious. The Marine stopped, slightly startled by the sudden appearance of the man. I've been thinking, he said after a moment, still unsure how to phrase it. I've learned so much in the past few weeks, but I still feel like there's something I'm missing. I don't know what it is yet. The old man gave a slight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes, but still carried a sense of understanding. You've learned the most important thing, the veteran said. You've learned that it's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about doing your job when it counts. The Marine sat down next to him, feeling the weight of those words settle in. He had learned that lesson, but now he was seeking something else. But what happens after that? When you've done your job, when you've proven you're capable? Is that it? Is that all there is to it? The old man took a deep breath, his eyes still focused on the horizon. No, it's never just about that. It's about the men and women around you. It's about the ones who stand beside you when the world is falling apart. That's what makes it all worthwhile. Not the medal, not the recognition, but the bond you share. The Marine nodded slowly, absorbing the words. He had heard stories of camaraderie, of soldiers relying on each other in battle, but it had always felt distant. Now it felt more real. He had seen that bond firsthand in the exercise, in the way his team had worked together, trusted each other. I get that, he said quietly. But I still feel like there's something else I need to do, something I'm not seeing. The old man turned his head slightly, his gaze sharp. You're searching for something, but you won't find it until you stop looking for it. Stop trying to force it. You've already been doing it. You just don't realize it yet. The Marine frowned, not fully understanding. What do you mean? The old man looked directly at him then, his gaze steady, almost piercing. You've been living the soldier's code, Marine. You don't need to do anything more. The purpose isn't out there somewhere waiting for you. It's right here. He tapped his chest lightly. The Marine stared at him, feeling a mix of confusion and clarity. For the first time, it clicked. The purpose wasn't something external. It wasn't something he had to go out and search for. It was about doing the work, day after day, and finding meaning in the small moments. It was in the connection with others, in the quiet dedication to the mission. So, you're saying that I've already found it? He asked, the doubt in his voice beginning to fade. The old man nodded. You're already living it, Marine. You've been living it since the moment you picked up that rifle. You've been living it every time you showed up, every time you put in the effort, no matter how hard it got. The Marine sat back in his chair, finally feeling like something had clicked into place. He had been chasing something, thinking it was out of reach. But the truth was, it was always with him. It wasn't about becoming someone else or achieving something grand. It was about showing up, doing the work, and being there for the people who needed him. It was about finding meaning in every shot, every mission, and every day. He looked at the old man, a deep sense of gratitude welling up inside him. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The old man smiled, but it was a smile that carried no ego, just quiet acknowledgement. You don't have to thank me, Marine. Just keep doing what you're doing. As the Marine stood up to leave, He realized that he didn't need any more answers. He had everything he needed right in front of him. He had the work. He had the mission. And most importantly, he had the people who stood beside him. That was enough. The days passed, and the Marine found himself reflecting on the lessons he had learned, not just from the old man, but from the experiences that had shaped him. It was strange to think that just a few weeks ago, he had been so caught up in the idea of proving himself. But now, after everything, he understood that the true value of his service wasn't in the recognition or the titles, but in the commitment to the mission, to the people around him, and to the unspoken bond that tied them all together. One afternoon, as he was preparing for another training exercise, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to find one of the senior officers standing there, a stern look on his face. "Marine, I need to speak with you," the officer said, his tone serious. The Marine followed the officer to the command tent, his heart beating a little faster. What was this about? Had he done something wrong? The officer motioned for him to sit down, and the Marine obeyed, waiting for the news. "You've been performing exceptionally well," the officer began, his eyes scanning the Marine's face. "Your leadership skills have improved, and your attitude has shifted in a positive direction. But there's something else. We've got a situation on our hands." The Marine leaned forward, immediately alert. "What's going on, sir?" The officer hesitated for a moment before continuing. "We've received intelligence about a potential threat. It's not just a training exercise anymore. We need soldiers who can handle real pressure. We need people who can make the tough calls, even when the stakes are high. And right now, you're one of the people we're counting on." The Marine's mind raced. This was it. The moment he had been preparing for. It wasn't just about training anymore. It was real. "I'm ready, sir," he said without hesitation. "I've been ready." The officer studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good. I'm glad to hear that. You'll be part of a team tasked with securing a critical location. You'll need to think quickly and make the right calls, no matter what. This is going to test everything you've learned." As the Marine stood to leave, a sense of calm washed over him. This wasn't about proving himself anymore. He had already done that. It wasn't about showing everyone what he could do. It was about doing what needed to be done. And he was ready. The next few days were a blur of preparation. The Marine and his team ran through simulations, strategized their approach, and prepared for the worst. There was no room for mistakes. As they geared up for the mission, the Marine felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about the men and women who would be relying on him to get the job done. The day of the operation arrived, and the team made their way to the location, their nerves taut but controlled. The tension was palpable, but the Marine stayed focused. He thought about the lessons the old man had taught him. He thought about the trust that had been placed in him, and about how far he had come. As they approached the objective, the Marine's mind sharpened. This was the moment he had been training for. This was the test of everything he had learned. They moved in silently, securing their position, and waited for the signal. The operation unfolded as planned, but there were moments of chaos. The team encountered unexpected resistance, and decisions had to be made on the spot. The Marine felt the weight of each choice. His training, the lessons from the old man, everything was leading him to this point. He made the calls, led his team through the obstacles, and kept his focus. The mission was completed successfully, but not without its challenges. As the team debriefed later, the officer approached the Marine. "You did well, Marine," the officer said, his voice filled with respect. "You stayed calm, made the right calls, and led your team through a difficult situation. This is what we expect from our best." The Marine nodded, but inside, he knew something had changed. It wasn't about the recognition, the praise, or even the success of the mission. It was about the growth he had experienced, the understanding that had deepened inside him. He wasn't the same Marine who had walked into the base weeks ago. He had learned that being a soldier wasn't about being the best. It wasn't about seeking approval or recognition. It was about showing up, doing the work, and taking responsibility when it mattered most. As the sun set on the base that evening, the Marine stood alone, watching the sky change colors. He felt a quiet sense of pride, but not for what he had accomplished. He felt pride in who he had become. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, but he was ready for them. He knew now that the most important part of the mission was the commitment to do what needed to be done, no matter what. Weeks passed after the successful operation, But the Marine's mind continued to process what he had experienced. It had been the biggest test of his career so far, and as he settled back into his routine, something in him felt different. The old man's words continued to echo in his mind. It's not about being the best. It's about doing the job. The Marine had realized that the pressure he had once felt to stand out and prove his worth had melted away. He no longer sought the recognition of others, nor did he feel the need to constantly be on top. What mattered now was that he could be counted on, that when the time came, he would step up. One evening, the Marine found himself sitting alone in the barracks, his rifle beside him, as he stared at the ceiling. The events of the past few months replayed in his mind. The grueling training, the exercise, the mission, and everything that had led him here. He had grown, not just as a soldier, but as a person. Yet, the feeling of uncertainty still lingered in the background. Was this it? Was he done growing? Just as the thought crossed his mind, he received a message. It was from his commanding officer. "Marine, I need you to come by my office. There's something I need to discuss." The Marine's heart skipped a beat. Another operation? A new mission? He quickly grabbed his jacket and made his way to the officer's office. When he arrived, the officer was sitting behind his desk, looking over some paperwork. "Sit down, Marine," the officer said without looking up. The Marine did as he was told, sitting across from the officer. The silence between them was thick as the officer finished his work and finally looked up. "You've been doing well, but there's something more I think you're ready for. I've been watching you, and I think it's time you take on a leadership role." The Marine's stomach tightened. Leadership? Was he ready for that? The officer continued. "We have a new mission coming up, one that requires someone with both the skill and the character to lead. I'm offering you a chance to step up. You'll be in charge of a small team. You'll have to make decisions, guide them through the operation, and be the one they turn to when things get tough." The Marine was silent for a long moment. Leadership had always been something he admired in others, but he had never thought of himself in that role. He had always been content to follow orders, to do his job, and do it well. But now, with this offer, he had to decide if he was ready to step into the role of a leader. "I'm honored, sir," he said slowly, his voice steady. "But I'm not sure if I'm ready." The officer smiled, a slight but genuine smile. "That's the point, Marine. If you were sure, it wouldn't be a challenge. But I believe in you. I've seen you grow, and I think you're ready to face this next step." The Marine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling over him. Leadership wasn't just about giving orders or taking charge. It was about responsibility, about being the one others relied on when the stakes were high. It was about showing the way, even when the road ahead was uncertain. "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice firm. "I won't let you down, sir." The officer nodded, clearly pleased with the Marine's response. "I knew I could count on you. The mission will be tough, but I have no doubt you'll lead your team to success." The Marine stood and saluted. As he left the office, he couldn't help but feel a surge of both excitement and fear. This was the next chapter, the next challenge, and he knew it would test him in ways he hadn't been tested before. But he also knew that he was ready. Leadership wasn't something that could be taught in a classroom or a training exercise. It was something that had to be earned, something that had to be lived. And now, it was his turn to step up. As he walked back to his barracks, his mind raced with thoughts of the mission, his new responsibilities, and the people who would be depending on him. But amidst the uncertainty, one thing was clear. The Marine wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a leader. And this mission, whatever it would bring, would be the defining moment of his career. The Marine woke up early on the day of the mission, the excitement and pressure of his new role weighing heavily on his shoulders. He had spent days preparing, mentally and physically, but now that it was finally time, the uncertainty crept back in. He had been a soldier for years, but today he would be tested in a way he had never experienced before. Today he would lead. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his uniform for the final time, feeling the weight of responsibility settle in. He wasn't just another Marine anymore. He was the one in charge. His team was depending on him. They were relying on him to make the right decisions, to lead them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As he made his way to the briefing room, he found himself second-guessing everything. Was he ready for this? Could he really live up to the expectations that had been placed on him? When he entered the room, the other members of his team were already gathered, waiting for him. There was a quiet tension in the air, but also a sense of trust. They didn't question his authority. They didn't doubt his ability, but he could feel the weight of their eyes on him, and that made the pressure feel even more real. "All right, everyone," the Marine said, trying to sound confident. "You all know the mission. We've got one shot to get this right, and we're not leaving until we do. Stick to the plan, and we'll be fine." His voice was steady, but he could feel his heart beating faster than usual. This was it. This was the moment. The team nodded, acknowledging his command. As they geared up and made their way to the vehicles, the Marine couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The mission took them deep into enemy territory, a place filled with danger and uncertainty. Every step felt calculated, every decision weighed carefully. There was no room for mistakes. The Marine kept his focus, constantly checking in with his team, making sure everyone was ready and prepared. As they moved closer to the target location, the intensity of the situation began to build. The Marine knew the risks. He had studied the terrain, reviewed the intelligence, and was prepared for the worst. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something would go wrong. That's when he remembered what the old man had told him. It's not about the perfect plan. It's about doing what's needed when it matters most. Those words stuck with him as they reached the target area. The plan was set. Everyone had their role, and the Marine's job was to make sure it all went smoothly. But when the first shots rang out, everything changed. The operation was compromised. Gunfire echoed around them, and the team was immediately under attack. The Marine's training kicked in. He assessed the situation, gave orders, and made decisions on the spot. His heart raced, but his mind was clear. He had to stay calm. He had to lead. The battle was intense, and for a few moments, everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. But then, something shifted. The Marine remembered what he had learned over the past months. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about knowing exactly what would happen next. It was about keeping his cool, thinking strategically, and trusting his team. As the firefight continued, the Marine kept his focus, directing his team and making sure everyone was in position. His orders were concise, his voice steady. They moved as one, like a well-oiled machine, and slowly, they began to gain ground. The mission wasn't over yet, but the Marine felt a sense of pride in how his team responded. They trusted him. They had faith in him. And that, more than anything, made him realize that he was capable of leading them to victory. Hours later, after the dust had settled and the mission was complete, the Marine stood over the battlefield, surveying the scene. The operation had been a success, but the cost had been high. Some of his team members had been injured, and others had lost their lives. He felt the weight of their sacrifices, and it hit him harder than anything else. He wasn't just a leader now. He was responsible for their safety, for their lives. The officer arrived at the scene shortly after, his face serious but filled with respect. "You did it, Marine," he said quietly. "You led your team through the toughest situation we've faced. You showed what it means to be a leader." The Marine nodded, but inside, he didn't feel like celebrating. Yes, the mission was a success, but the reality of leadership was starting to sink in. It wasn't about being in control. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about the lives in his hands, the trust that had been placed in him, and the responsibility that came with it. As they returned to base, the Marine felt a deep sense of exhaustion, both physical and emotional. The mission had been completed, but the journey wasn't over. He had learned something important, something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Leadership wasn't about the title or the recognition. It was about the choices he made, the responsibility he took, and the people he led. And as he sat in the barracks that night, the weight of it all sinking in, the Marine knew one thing for sure. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a leader. The weeks following the operation felt like a new chapter for the Marine. The pressure of leadership, the burden of responsibility, still lingered, but there was something else now. A deeper sense of understanding, of purpose. Every action he took was measured, every decision considered carefully. He had realized that leadership was not just about making the right call in the heat of the moment. It was about earning the trust of those who followed you and leading by example. It was a responsibility he would never take lightly. One morning, as he made his way to the training ground for the day's drill, the Marine noticed the usual buzz of activity had a different energy to it. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a quiet murmur among the soldiers. As he walked toward the group, he saw a familiar face, his team leader from the last mission. The man looked up and motioned for him to come over. Marine, he said with a nod. Got a moment? The Marine stepped up, curiosity piqued. What's going on? He asked. You're being considered for something new, his team leader replied, eyes narrowing with the weight of what he was about to say. The brass has been impressed with your leadership. There's talk about you stepping up to take on more responsibility, maybe even a bigger command. The Marine's heart skipped a beat. He had known that his role was evolving, but this was something different. It wasn't just about leading his team anymore. It was about taking on a larger leadership position. I don't know if I'm ready for that, the Marine said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. You were ready the moment you led us through that mission, the team leader said firmly. You've got what it takes. They see it. The Marine was silent for a moment, processing the weight of the words. Was he truly ready? He had taken the lead on one mission, but this would be different. It was one thing to lead a small team on the ground, but leading a larger group, making decisions that impacted more lives. He wasn't sure if he could live up to that. What do you think? The team leader asked, pulling him back to the moment. It's your call, but you've earned this. The Marine nodded slowly, trying to shake the nervous feeling in his stomach. He wasn't sure what the future held, but the path ahead seemed clear. He had always followed orders. He had always been the one who did what was asked of him. But now, the idea of making decisions for others, guiding them through difficult situations, felt like a completely different challenge. As the day went on, the Marine couldn't stop thinking about what his team leader had said. Could he really step into a larger role? Could he lead a bigger group with the same integrity he had shown before? Later that night, he sat in his barracks, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the decision. It wasn't just about the title or the responsibility. It was about the impact he would have on others, the example he would set. He thought about the old man, the lessons the veteran had taught him. Leadership wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about being the best. It was about doing what needed to be done, staying true to what mattered most. It was about serving others, protecting them, and doing your duty with honor. The Marine took a deep breath. He had come a long way since the days when he was just trying to fit in, just trying to prove something to the world. He had learned what it meant to be a soldier, what it meant to serve, and what it meant to lead. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always glamorous, but it was what he was meant to do. With that thought, he made his decision. The next morning, he reported to his commanding officer. Sir, the Marine said, standing tall, I'm ready to take on the next challenge. The officer looked up, surprised. You sure? This isn't going to be easy. The Marine nodded firmly. I know, but I'm ready. I've learned a lot, and I'm ready to do more. The officer smiled slightly. Good. I think you're exactly what we need. The Marine left the office that day with a new sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew that he was ready to face it. Leadership was no longer just about making decisions. It was about guiding others, about carrying the weight of responsibility, and doing what was right for the mission, for the team, and for everyone who depended on him. It was a long road ahead, but the Marine was no longer afraid of what came next. He was ready for whatever challenge lay ahead, knowing that, with every step, he was becoming the leader he had always been meant to be. The weeks following the decision to step into a larger leadership role passed quickly, and the Marine found himself adjusting to his new responsibilities. The pressure was higher now, and the challenges were greater, but he had learned how to handle them. Every day brought something new, unexpected situations, difficult choices, and moments that tested his resolve. But through it all, he never wavered. He had found something deeper within himself that he hadn't realized was there before. As he led his team through each mission, he focused less on the recognition and more on the task at hand. He knew what it meant to be a leader now, not just by the title, but by the way he led his team through the hardest of times. There were moments of doubt, of course. There were moments when the weight of the decisions felt like too much, when the responsibilities seemed overwhelming. But each time, he would think back to the lessons he had learned, from the old man, from the team he led, from the missions that had shaped him. He wasn't alone. He had his team. They were in this together, and they trusted him to guide them. One evening, after a particularly difficult operation, the Marine sat in the command tent, reviewing the mission report. His team had come through strong, but it had been a hard-fought victory. There had been close calls, and some of his team had been injured. He couldn't help but replay the decisions he had made, the things he could have done differently. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. He looked up to see his team leader from the previous mission standing in the doorway. Mind if I come in? The officer asked, a faint smile on his face. The Marine nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. Of course, sir. The officer stepped in and sat down. How's everything going? How are you holding up? He asked, his voice gentle but direct. The Marine exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. It's been tough. There are moments when I feel like I'm not doing enough or making the right choices. There's so much on the line, and sometimes it feels like everything is moving faster than I can keep up with. The officer nodded, his expression serious. I get it. You're in a new position now. It's not easy, but let me tell you something I've learned over the years. Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being there when it counts, making the best choices you can, and owning your mistakes when they happen. The Marine listened intently, his eyes focused on the officer. You've already done that. You've shown your team that they can rely on you. And that's what makes you a leader. Not the decisions you get right, but the trust you build. You've earned that trust. The Marine's heart swelled slightly at the officer's words. It was something he had been hoping to hear, but it meant more coming from someone who had been through it all. I just want to do right by them, he said quietly. They've put their trust in me. I can't let them down. The officer smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. That's what makes you who you are. You're not just worried about your own success. You're worried about the success of your team. And that's what makes you a leader. The Marine nodded, feeling the weight of the officer's words settle deep inside him. It wasn't about being perfect or always having the answers. It was about guiding others, standing by them when things were tough, and giving everything for the mission. The officer stood up, patting the Marine on the shoulder. You're doing great. Don't forget that. The Marine watched him leave, his heart feeling lighter. The doubt that had been nagging at him began to fade. He had the strength he needed inside of him. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to keep showing up, keep leading with integrity, and keep doing what needed to be done. The next morning, the Marine stood in front of his team, ready to brief them on the next mission. His words came with confidence, but also with the quiet wisdom he had earned over the past few months. He had learned that leadership was about much more than just calling the shots. It was about being there for the people who relied on you, for the ones who trusted you with their lives. He wasn't perfect, but he was doing his best. And that, he knew, was enough. As they moved out, he looked at his team, seeing the same trust in their eyes that he had seen all along. They believed in him, and for the first time in a long time, he believed in himself, too. He had come a long way, and the journey wasn't over. But he was ready for whatever came next. This emotional story follows the journey of a Marine who finds himself stepping into the challenging role of leadership, discovering his true purpose beyond just proving himself. In this emotional story, he navigates the complexities of leading a team through a high-stakes mission, learning that leadership is about trust, responsibility, and guiding others through difficult situations. As the Marine faces both external challenges and internal doubts, he discovers the deeper meaning of being a soldier, not in recognition or perfection, but in service to others. The emotional story delves into the struggles, growth, and sacrifices of leadership, showing how the Marine learns to embrace his role and earn the trust of those around him. This emotional story emphasizes the importance of integrity and decision-making, and how the journey of self-discovery and growth shapes the true essence of a leader. Through moments of doubt, fear, and triumph, this emotional story reveals the strength found in vulnerability, and how one man can transform from a soldier to a leader who guides with heart and purpose.